Hello, my name is Jesse, and today we'll be covering how host group inheritance works in Nagios XI. And this is actually key if you want to scale your Nagios XI infrastructure, so it's important to understand how host group inheritance works in full before you implement it. It's very likely that if you implement it without understanding it fully, you're going to have to re-implement it later, and that's what this video is about, kind of avoiding that situation. So what you want to do is you want to go to Configure, Core Config Manager. What we're going to do is set up a host group. So click on Host Groups, click on Add New, and let's just call this host group Test Host Group 1. Then we'll describe it, maybe just the same thing, Test Host Group 1, and then press Save. You can, and it's worth noting that in Test Host Group 1, you can click Manage Hosts and select the hosts that you want to be a part of this host group. And this is the way that I recommend doing it. The reason is because all of your hosts are managed from one central location, aka the host group. The alternative is going into an individual host and clicking Manage Host Groups and then adding them to a host group this way, but then you don't have a central way of managing that. So that's the idea. So let's add a couple of hosts to this host group. Let's just go into our Test Host Group 1, click on Manage Hosts, and let's just add, let's say 5.67, and let's also add, let's look for something else that I have control of, 5.41. Add selected. Now these two hosts will be added to the host group. I can close this, press save, and press apply configuration. So the host group is being generated and the hosts have been added to the host group. What this means is we can go home and we can click on Hostgroup Summary, and you can see your new Test Host Group 1 group, and so it's logically grouped in this way. So that's the obvious benefit of host groups, is logically grouping like hosts together. But there's also an important thing that hasn't been mentioned yet, and I'll go over what that is. Host groups are also capable of containing services. So while you don't see add service inside of the host group itself, if you go to services, and let's just click on a ping check because this is the most common check, this is an easy check to cover, you'll notice that you can click Manage Host Groups. So what we have here is we have a service capable of being added to a host group. And when this happens, when you add a service to a host group, any host inside of that host group automatically obtains that service. The way that Nagios XI wizards work and the way that people normally set XI up is that they make redundant services. So for instance, if we search for ping, you'll notice that we have about 1 million ping checks. We don't need all of these ping checks. These ping checks could easily just be one single ping check in multiple host groups, and then hosts can be added to those host groups and inherit the ping check. That way we only have one check to modify if we need to make a global change instead of all 30 or so checks that you see here. So that's the idea. To demonstrate this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this ping check here and I'll just clone it. So I've cloned it into a copy. Now I'm just going to call it generic ping check, and I'll describe it that way too. Generic ping check. So that'll be the service. I'm going to detach it from the host that it's attached to, and instead I'm going to give it to this host group, Test Host Group 1. Add that to the selected host group, make it active, press save, press apply configuration. So this is going to apply, and what will happen is that that service has been added to this host group. Those hosts have been added to the host group. Therefore, those hosts will inherit any services added to the host group. So let's go to Hostgroup Summary, go to Test Host Group 1, and check out the services. You'll notice generic ping check shows up here, and it also shows up down here, generic ping check. So that single check has been added to more than one host in a very simple way. And the way that I recommend managing your host groups is to look at your servers and take a look at what they have in common that you'd like to monitor. So for instance, if you have Apache servers, like some sort of Apache web cluster, if those servers need similar checks, make a host group for those similar checks. You might make a host group called Linux-based checks and just have it do, disk checks and ping checks and memory checks and CPU checks and things like that. Just so any host that you'd want to be checked via, you'd want these basic variables checked on, you can just add them to the Linux basic host check group. Instead of, cloning services or rerunning through a wizard or something, you can very easily just manage that through the core config manager by, adding a new host, giving it a host group, and then the services just fill in. And it's worth noting that you can add a host to more than one host group as well. So if you go into the host groups section, you can click on more than one host group and add a single host to more than one, therefore it will inherit all of the services from all of the host groups. So again, maybe you have Linux-based checks, maybe you have Apache 2.2 checks, and then Apache 2.4 checks. So even though all of your Apache 2.2 and your Apache 2.4 servers can have Linux-based checks, they can also have specific Apache checks because you've made specific Apache host groups. And that is the idea about inheritance with host groups, and I hope I've explained it well enough. It is an important concept to understand if you plan on scaling your infrastructure to a large size, especially once you get past 100 or 200 hosts. Things start to look very convoluted in the GUI if you do not use host groups appropriately. If you have any questions about that process, please feel free to reach out to us at the support forum. We're always at support.nagios.com/forum. Otherwise, feel free to check out our related content at the YouTube channel. Thanks.